in. That's when we start really seeing, okay, what was caused by things that were the foundational pieces. And a lot of times things will improve to a certain point, and then we'll start seeing more of the patterns, the individual patterns coming out, right? The things that are much more hormone related or much more neurotransmitter related or much more, detox related. And so then we can start picking out some of those more specific things that are individualized to the specific person.
On Connecting the Dots, we aim to redefine what the term healthy means by learning from experts, identifying different areas of our life that impact our well-being, and becoming our greatest health advocates.
We believe that by making small lifestyle changes, people can not only manage, but also prevent a wide range of chronic illnesses we are taught to believe are normal in our society today.
My name's Kathleen Carney. I'm a nutritionist, foodie, author, and creator and co-host of this raw, real, and sometimes ridiculous show.
And I'm Melissa Chamis, the other half of Connecting the Dots. I'm also a certified yoga instructor, Reiki 1 practitioner, and a hustler just trying to survive in corporate America.
We are close friends who bonded over our messy healing journeys and are eager to share our experiences with you.
So come join this journey with us as we all learn to connect the dots between the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of being human.
We now know that 80% of the reason why people go to the doctor's office is because of stress. It's a stress-induced illness.
So if we want to be working on healing the body, the gut and the brain have to be worked on together.
People get sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Never accept that, oh, I'm just always going to be this way, because there's always something you can do about it.
So make one lifestyle choice after another and do it with support.
The future of health looks like prevention.
It's going to be more common for everybody to have their own customized health plan.
Our health is no different than the health of the planet.
It's never too late to feel great.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Connecting the Dots. We have such an informative episode for you today, and it is going to be so helpful for anybody who is suffering from migraines, frequent headaches, hormone imbalances, adrenal fatigue, or allergies. We have Dr. Tanya on the show, and she is a wealth of knowledge and really breaks down all of our questions about migraines and hormones and so many other topics that Melissa and I were interested in. I really wanted to have her on the show because after I went off of birth control in 2021, I started suffering from headaches right before I got my period and during the first few days of my cycle. And I, of course, knew that they were tied to hormones. And at first I was just like, oh, this is just a symptom of PMS. But as I continued through nutrition school and continued to learn about our hormone fluctuations, and I took that Sacred Cycle course in 2021 and learned about exactly where your hormones should be in each week of the month and what you should be eating and the vitamins you should be taking and how to support healthy hormone balance. I realized that there was probably a lot more going on in my body than just your average PMS headache. So I was really excited when Dr. Tanya reached out to be on the show, and it was an immediate yes. I knew we had to have her, and I had to pick her brain about all the things, selfishly for me, about hormones, but I knew that she was going to be such a great asset to all of you, and she did not disappoint.
Yeah, so Dr. Tanya Paynter is the founder of Migraine Mastery, which is a 24-week online program designed to significantly reduce migraines and help women better manage their symptoms. She graduated from the University of Washington with a bachelor's degree in cellular and molecular biology and a minor in inorganic chemistry before attending medical school at Bastyr University. She graduated in 2012 with her Naturopathic Medical Degree and has been treating women with chronic migraines for almost a decade. She has suffered from chronic headaches herself for nearly 20 years, so this became her calling to help women find and manage their migraines more effectively. So for my science nerds, you're going to love this episode because she gives so many different stats and all the science behind why migraines occur and how to help heal them. And she also talks about how this not only affects women, but men make up 1/3 of the people who suffer from migraines. And the reason that this episode really resonated with me is because I started getting migraines when I first started working, and I noticed it was from stress. I don't get them that much anymore, but I've had a lot of other health issues, as you've heard from previous episodes. And when she talks about the hormones like the progesterone and estrogen ratio being off, or adrenal fatigue, which I have phase 2 of adrenal fatigue, and the cortisol levels being low, these are all things that I struggle with. And because I have a lot of allergies, my histamine levels are high. And she talks about how histamine plays a role in migraines and different things that you should stay away from if you do have high histamine levels. So she talks about it in all different aspects and all different aspects of health. Like migraines isn't the only diagnosis, it is a symptom of other issues. So whether you suffer from migraines or not, this episode will really help you learn a lot more about health in general.
Yeah, she really talks about like the foundations of health that we preach on this podcast. So it might seem a little bit repetitive or a nice reminder for you of what you should be doing. She actually says that diet and stress management, if you can get those regulated, that's 90% of the battle of migraines. If you're a migraine sufferer, if you can figure out the diet piece and the stress management piece, you're almost there to being healed. And it just reminded me so much of the work that I do as a nutritionist through Kathleen Carney Wellness, and how I really work with my clients on these same foundations that she works with her clients on. What are you eating? How much are you sleeping? Are you drinking enough water? Are you moving your body? How are you managing your stress? And it really reaffirmed for me the work that I'm doing, but also the value in seeing a specialist, because that 10% could be your hormones. It could be you have high histamine. It could be adrenal fatigue. And so working with an expert to really get to the root of those and cure them. And I love how Tanya talks about the specific tests that you should run for each of these issues, and why conventional medical doctors, on the tests that they run for you, why things might come up completely normal, but you're like, no, I'm suffering from a migraine, or I'm always tired, or I'm having extreme allergies. Like, I know it's not normal. And a lot of these are the same tests that I have learned about through my internship as I'm getting my certified nutrition specialist license. And so a lot of it was just really reassuring and confirmed that there is always a way to find out what's going on in your body. And if you're not getting the right answer, ask for another opinion. Find a practitioner who's going to figure out what's going on with that 10%, especially if you're somebody who is like, I get 8 to 9 hours of sleep. I eat a pretty anti-inflammatory diet. I move my body. I love exercise. I drink a ton of water. I meditate, or I journal, or I have, stress management techniques. Why am I not getting better?
Yeah. And I think testing is important. Like when I did my test to find out my estrogen progesterone ratio, it was a saliva test. Same with my cortisol levels. And that really showed where I was struggling the most and what herbs and whatnot to be prescribed, so I can start to even that ratio out. And she also mentioned something in the episode for those who stare at a screen a lot and suffer from migraines because of work, these special lenses called neuro lenses that could help with your, I'm not even going to try to explain it because I don't know the science behind it, but you could take a test online and get these special glasses that will help with that. So we will link that in the show notes for you. But I just thought it was a really cool concept that she brought that up and gives listeners all these different ideas for tests. So even if you don't work for her, you could maybe bring up one of these ideas, a saliva test or a urine test, to your current doctor, so you can kind of help get the answers you need to start on your healing journey.
Yeah, and you'll hear her talk about herbs and how much she loves herbs. As we said already, she's a naturopathic medical doctor. So she encompasses holistic medicine, conventional medicine. She's so cool. And as you might know, we have an affiliate link with Organic Olivia. And if you know me, if you've been following me on social media, you know I'm obsessed with her, and I'm obsessed with her products and how much they have helped me. And specifically, some of the products that I think really correlate with this episode are her Flow Balance and her Natal Nourish, both of which help balance hormones. Then she has a liver juice. And if you know anything about estrogen dominance, you know part of estrogen dominance could be that your liver is not able to detox the excess estrogen out of your body at a fast enough rate. And so having that liver juice is a really good support if that's what's going on for you. And she also has an adrenal recovery supplement. And we'll talk about adrenal fatigue in this episode and how the adrenals play a role in migraines. And so, of course, before taking or purchasing any of these supplements, please consult with your physician, your nutritionist, to make sure that they don't counteract with any of your medications and that they'd be good fits for you. But if they are good fits for you, please order them from us. We have the affiliate link in the show notes as well as the resource guide. And the resource guide for this episode is amazing, full of so much information to help you with migraine specifically, but also on your healing journey.
Yes. So purchase those products if you'd like to support us or if you're just interested in trying more. Yeah. And we hope you enjoy this episode.
Right. Well, thank you so much for being on Connecting the Dots with us. Melissa and I are so excited to chat with you. And we like to start off all of our episodes by asking our icebreaker question, which is, what is something that you're reading, watching, or listening to?
I have kind of fallen in love with that show, The Chosen, the kind of the life of Jesus, back when, like, it totally personalizes him. And I've just been fascinated with their interpretation of what he would have been like as an actual person. It's really cool.
I'll have to check it out. I just wrote the title down. I haven't heard of that.
Yeah. It's either Netflix or Hulu, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your health journey and how that led you to where you are today?
Sure. So my journey kind of started when I was 16. I was rear-ended in a car accident, and that kind of started a cascade of events where I basically started having, fairly frequent headaches, and I'd never really had that many headaches before. And that kind of progressed into daily headaches, and then that progressed into migraines. And so I spent probably, that was 16. So I spent probably 10 years trying to figure out, how can I get rid of these things? What's going on? I went to chiropractors, I went to my doctor, and they tried the best they could, but nothing really seemed to work. And I just kept getting prescribed medications and nothing really helped. And I was just told, well, you're just too inflamed. And I'm like, well, great, but what does that mean? Like, how do I get rid of that? And so that kind of just led down, I went to undergraduate school, and then I came home, and I was actually in law enforcement for about a decade before I went back to med school, and, struggled with them through patrolling. And then I, the dream was always to become a doctor, right? So that was always my chosen path. And when I finally got to the point where I felt like it was time to kind of pick that back up and leave my law enforcement career and go back into medical school, and I just had this focus of, trying to figure out for myself as well, like it became just a secondary mission to figure out what was going on with myself, my health, why I woke up every morning feeling like I was 80 years old in a 25-year-old body. And so it took me kind of the 4 years that I was in med school to kind of piece together a lot of the things that were contributing to my picture of ill health. And some of it was diet, some of it was hormones, some of it was stress. And so I kind of worked on all of the pieces and really dug into understanding the biochemistry that was going on as I was learning about it. And that kind of led me to, over the next 10 years of really understanding what was going on with my body, how these symptoms were manifesting, like what was actually going on with me and how that was playing a role in my chronic pain. And so, when I started practicing medical school, like I just had this soft spot for women who would come in and have regular, daily headaches, because I knew where they were coming from.
Yeah.
And it was just so rewarding to be able to use what I had learned through medical school and myself to be able to treat them and treat them effectively for the first time in decades for them. Right. And that kind of just led me to creating the program that I do now. So I have a 12-week program that helps women with chronic migraines to kind of understand what's going on with their biochemistry and then figuring out how they need to kind of get back in balance. And so that kind of led me down that path of creating that for them so that, I could have a bigger reach than just those that I could see in person in my clinic in Spokane, Washington. So that's where I am today.
Wow, that is so cool and so inspiring. And I know that so many listeners can probably relate to your story. I've heard from countless people similar experiences of being in a car accident or having this like one big trauma event happen to them, and for years trying to deal with the symptoms and recover and heal from that. I'm so curious. I know that you had mentioned that you were, getting your diet and your hormones and your stress and these different factors. You were addressing all of them, but and I'm sure these are the pillars in your program too. Like what were the pillars that helped you heal and that you in turn use in your program to help other women heal?
Yeah, you're right. There's kind of a foundational thing that everybody needs to kind of go through to support their body and set it up for optimal healing. And then moving from those foundations into the more specific treatments, right? So the foundational things are probably what most everybody who's been dealing with chronic headaches or migraines knows about already, right? The hydration, the sleep, the healthy foods, and avoiding the trigger, things that trigger them, making sure they're getting adequate nutrition, working on kind of liver support and detoxification pieces. So those are some of the major pieces that everybody works on through how we approach it. And then once you have a good, 4 to 6 weeks where you're really, anti-inflammatory diet, the hydration is where it needs to be. You've started on a sleep schedule. You're really working on that stress management. Once all those pieces are starting to get dialed in, that's when we start really seeing, okay, what was caused by things that were the foundational pieces. And a lot of times things will improve to a certain point, and then we'll start seeing more of the patterns, the individual patterns coming out, right? The things that are much more hormone related or much more neurotransmitter related or much more, detox related. And so then we can start picking out some of those more specific things that are individualized to the specific person.
Yeah. And I think you touched on it a little bit before, but you said when you were starting to learn in med school, like you were starting to understand what's actually going on in your body. So could you talk a little bit about like what's actually going on when you have a migraine? And then also this is a 2-part question for listeners who maybe don't have migraines or know someone, but don't know what it feels like. Can you explain kind of what it is and what it feels like for people who do?
Sure. Yeah. So migraines themselves can present in a bunch of different ways, depending on the person. But the diagnostic criteria for it is that they have, for chronic migraines, at least, they have at least 8 migraine days a month that are not helped by medication, that are and that are also accompanied with other symptoms like light or sound sensitivity, might have visual disturbances accompanied by nausea and or vomiting. So there are some specific diagnostic criteria. As far as like what it feels like, The best thing that I can think of is, like, for somebody who's never had a migraine, is to imagine what the worst headache pain or worst head pain you've ever had. Even if that's just, a brain freeze from eating your ice cream too fast, right? And taking that, multiplying it by 10, and then, look in the sun for a few minutes and having that bright stabbing pain that comes from looking at the sun directly behind your eyes. That's what the light sensitivity is like, right? And then throw on the worst, stomach flu you've ever had, where you're just laying in bed trying not to puke. And then for good measure, you might throw in some weird, like, visual disturbances where, your eyes are kind of going in and out, or you have a blind spot in the middle of your vision, or you're feeling really dizzy. Put them all together, and that's kind of what a migraine's like. So it's super fun, really easy to concentrate when you're having one of those, right? Yeah, they're pretty intense.
So I know with you, you said you got into a car accident. Are there usually trigger points in people's lives where this happens, or is it like one of those pillars, like the foundations you were talking about, like sleep, hydration, nutrition, that is off that could also trigger migraines?
Yeah, that's a great question. I see quite a smattering of all of the above. There are definitely people that say, I know, like, they can pinpoint the day that it happened. They know that it was triggered by, they fell off the swing set when they were 7 and they hit their head. And ever since then, they've had these headaches, which then are later diagnosed as migraines, right? So there's definitely can be a single traumatic event that triggered them. They can also just start, maybe you start having one around your period, and then you start getting one around your period, and then one in the middle of the month. And then suddenly you're starting to get, one a week, and they can slowly kind of just insinuate themselves and get worse. So I've heard that. And then I've also heard the ones, where they can remember being 5 years old in kindergarten and sitting in the teacher's office with a really bad headache. And, so they can start as early as childhood. So it just, again, totally depends on the person. And there's a lot of genetics that are actually involved with migraines. So not necessarily genetic in the way that my mom had migraines, my grandma had migraines, but my dad had, depression and anxiety, and my cousin was bipolar. And, so things like that can actually, those genes that are involved in some of those, mental, emotional components, in cardiovascular things, in other chronic illnesses, are linked with migraines as well. So we can have maybe not a family history of migraine specific, but of a family history of things that are related to genes that are also implicated in migraines. And so, when we start looking at some of those factors, when we see a child that's having them, as 5 years old, there's very often a familial component, and their genes just aren't working properly. So we want to work on, and we can actually influence how they work. We can't change them, but we can improve the functionality of those genes so that they actually start working in a more effective way. So that's also an important piece from an individual standpoint.
That is so cool. And I can relate to when you said, oh, women, start to get migraines right before their period, and then it starts to infiltrate. I, cross my fingers, haven't had them infiltrate any other seasons of my month, but the day before I get my period, or 2 days before, I had been getting a headache that would slowly trickle into a migraine, and that would last up until the first or second day of my cycle. So I'd have them for like 2, 3, 4 days in a row. And, basically when you were describing it, like, I literally have to be sitting in my room in the dark, can't watch TV, attempting to work, but like the screen is like as low as it can possibly go. Luke is like, my boyfriend is like bringing me hot water bottles and being like, are you sure you don't want anything? And I'm like, no, being a pretty big Grinch. And so that was, one of the things that has caused me to really analyze my sleeping, eating, hormones, all of those things that you were kind of addressing and saying were pillars of your program, because I was like, there has to be a way to manage this. And one of the things that my coach had said was that you get them because your estrogen drops before your period. And so was wondering if this if you could speak more on that, and also if there are other reasons why this happens to women right before their menstrual cycle. Would love to hear what you think and all of that.
Yeah, hormones are such a huge piece for women with migraines. And I'm a fan of saying, if you're a woman and you have migraines, that hormones are involved to some degree, right? It's a piece of the puzzle. So whenever I hear symptoms around the week before your period, the first thing that pops into my head is progesterone. So your coach is not wrong in the fact that estrogen does drop right before your period starts, and your hormones are lowest in the day before and the day of, like the first day of your period, and leading, a few days into your cycle. And so we definitely have research that shows that estrogen drops are a trigger for migraine. So anytime you have those changes in estrogen around ovulation, around period time, those are major trigger times for women with hormonal issues. But the week before your period is also really important for progesterone. And I see in probably 90% of my clients, they're progesterone deficient. So progesterone is our calming hormone. It helps us sleep. It helps us to be more sane. And so, when we have a lot of PMS and kind of ragey feelings and hormonal or mental fluctuations around PMS time, it's because our progesterone is not where it needs to be, right? And sometimes, estrogen isn't where it needs to be too, but extremely important in a hormonal migraine picture. Progesterone is a neurosteroid, so it's an anti-inflammatory for the brain, and it's super important in regulation of, histamine, which can be a big issue. It's very big in regulating some of our neurotransmitters that are implicated in migraines as well. And so when we're deficient in that and we have increased inflammation and all these other things are off because our progesterone isn't where it needs to be, that's a major problem. And so I tend to see that a lot of women that come to me, their hormones, it's not always that you're low in estrogen or you're low in progesterone, right? That's easily measured. And most of the time they say, well, I've already been tested, my hormones are normal. And that's great. But what's not being taken into account is the ratio between your estrogen and your progesterone. This is extremely important just in general for women's health, but specifically for migraines, because you can have a high normal estrogen and a low normal progesterone and look normal. But when you put them together, we should have a ratio of about a minimum of 200 to 1, 200 progesterone to 1 estrogen, right? And a lot of times the women that I see are 10 to 1, 20 to 1, like extremely low. So they're considered estrogen dominant or progesterone deficient. You can call it either one, without actually being out of normal range. And so that ratio has to be taken into consideration for optimal health. And when it comes to those hormonal migraines, because that can be a big reason why they've always said, well, I swear it's related to my hormones, but my hormones always come back normal. And it's super frustrating, but that's because nobody is looking at that estrogen progesterone ratio. And so that's like the biggest thing that I want people with struggling with hormone migraines to really understand, is that it can be tested, but it can't be tested by blood tests. It has to be done through urine testing. So the type of testing that's done is really important to make sure that things are where they need to be.
That is fascinating. I know Melissa's brain is probably going a mile a minute to ask you a question, but really quick, I'm curious then, personally and for listeners, like, are there ways to, I'm sure there are ways to balance your progesterone and estrogen so you get to that closer to that 200 to 1 ratio and farther from that 10 to 15 to 1?
Mm-hmm. Yes. There's multiple different options, right? So there's your least interventive option, which again is coming back to those foundations, right? It's making sure you're getting proper sleep, making sure that you're having regular bowel movements, making sure that your liver is doing its job properly, that you have the nutrients that you need in order to be able to detoxify your hormones. So all of those foundational pieces are supremely important. But then you can kind of move into, all right, well, great. So now we're doing all that, but that's going to take a really long time to balance it that way. So then we want to look at, all right, depending, if you're 150 to 1, you're pretty close. So let's work on doing some herbal support, right? There's some hormones that have estrogen stimulating effects. There's some hormone or some herbs that have some progesterone stimulating effects. So then we can kind of take a look at tailoring some herbal support for you. Cool. And then if you are in that 10, 15 to 1, and you're suffering quite a bit, then we want to probably the foundation always has to be there, but we probably want to skip over the herbs and go maybe more into the hormone support, right? Yeah. An important piece here. So this is another really key thing that isn't necessarily always talked about in conventional approaches. There is synthetic hormones, which is your birth control and, basically what your prescriptions are. And then there's bioidentical. So the prescription, the synthetic hormones are synthetic, right? They're derived from non-human places, right? Horse urine being one of the main areas that we get some of these hormones, right? And so when we look at the synthetic hormone side by side to our hormones, you can definitely tell which one is lab, which one is us, right? They're different. The synthetic hormones stimulate our hormonal receptors much differently. They bind much stronger. So it does have a bit of a different effect. People with migraine bodies tend to be very sensitive to even the slightest change. So when we're looking at some of those, really tightly binding things that overstimulate our receptors, that can actually be problematic. So they can feel like, well, I've already tried hormones and it doesn't work for me. Well, that's because maybe it's not the right dose and or not the right form for your body. So that's an important piece. The other thing is, so then now what's bioidentical? Bioidentical is usually plant derived. And so when you put a bioidentical hormone next to our hormone, you cannot tell which one is ours and which one is the plant. It is identical. Wow. So that's what bioidentical means. So it binds the way that our body was designed to bind to the hormone receptors. So that is the form that I very, very much encourage women with migraines to go for. Now, sure, there are a lot of people that do really well with birth control and it takes away their migraines. Fantastic. Like use it if you got it because it's super easy. But if you've tried it and it doesn't work for you, know that there is the option of bioidentical, which often has a different response.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some examples of like bioidentical things? Like, is it certain foods or is it certain herbs? Like you were saying?
No, it's a prescription. So there's cream. So it's actually getting progesterone or estrogen in your body. So you can do it orally, you can do it topically with, a cream, you can do it under the tongue with drops. There's different forms, but and there actually is a bioidentical prescription progesterone option now out there called Prometrium. So that is also an option. The one thing that is, again, knowing how sensitive that our hormone or our migraine bodies are to changes, a typical dosing of like 100 milligram progesterone supplement or medication is maybe way too much for your body, right? So I see this all the time. Well, I was put on progesterone, it was bioidentical and it made things way worse. And it's not that your body doesn't like progesterone, it's that it was way too much all at once so that it looked like a major hormone shift, which is going to trigger a migraine for you, right? So there's also the way that it's dosed, and you usually have to start at a ridiculously low amount and work yourself up to the dosing that we ultimately need you to be at. And sometimes it can take 4 or 5 months to get there. Whereas, Sally down the street can take the dose that we want her at and be completely fine with it, right? So there is a bit of a dosing difference needed for people with migraines.
That's really interesting. I did not know that. Never heard of bioidentical. So that's good to know.
A lot of people haven't. Yeah, it's a great option.
So I know we're talking a lot about like women who get migraines and hormones, but I'm curious, can men get migraines, or if they do, like what are the common causes for them? And like, is it also similar, like a hormone imbalance?
Yeah. So men absolutely can get migraines and do. Women tend to, I think the current statistic is women get migraines 3 times more often than men do, or, there's a three time higher incidence for women. But that still leaves 30% of chronic migraine people as men, right? And so it's the same, right? The hormonal piece is going to look a little bit different. That 200-to-1 ratio doesn't apply to men. But there is a lot of progesterone deficiency that I see in men with migraines. And, and that can be a big problem, because when you think about men and hormones, you think testosterone and that's it, right? But so women have some testosterone that can also be low testosterone for women, can be a trigger. But for men, sure, like everybody's going to be assessing the testosterone piece, but nobody looks at estrogen and progesterone for men, because those are quote unquote women hormones, right? But when the men don't have enough of the estrogen or progesterone, then we can actually see increased anxiety, problems sleeping, a lot of the same symptoms that women get as well. But it's different, it comes across differently for men than it does for women. And so a lot of times people just forget that. So men aren't even tested for estrogen, progesterone. So those can be a big factor for men. But of course, again, the foundation, it's asexual. It's for everyone, men, women. So the sleep, the stress, the proper diet, all of those things, movement, those are all really important for men as well as for women.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like a lot of people don't talk about men getting migraines. So I was always curious how it showed up for them. But for me, I didn't start getting migraines till after I graduated college and started my first job. And then I noticed it was brought on by stress and staring at screens. And I remember the first time I was in my office, like lights off, wearing sunglasses, looking at a screen. I'm like, I need to go home. Yeah. This is not healthy. So I know during high stress times, that's usually what triggers it for me. But I'm curious if like the adrenals play a big role in it, and like adrenal fatigue could kind of cause the immune system to go down and trigger more migraines. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So there is a very high percentage of, again, my clients. So I tend to see the really difficult cases that have had migraines for decades and no success with anything else, right? So in those chronic cases, I see a lot of women. So I work more, I again go back to women because that's really who I work with, because we work a lot on the hormonal piece. Yeah. But I'm sure it also applies to men. Is adrenal fatigue is a very real thing. And cortisol, the level of cortisol that we have is really important. And again, is not something that's typically measured. And if it is measured with a conventional approach, it's not measured correctly. So cortisol can't really be done with, it can be done with blood, but it doesn't really give us a good picture of what's going on, because a lot of times, usually blood draw for cortisol should be done first thing in the morning, before 8 a.m. And that way we can kind of see what the peak is for the day. But we need to know what the cortisol level is doing throughout the day. So when we're looking at cortisol, we know that migraines are relating or are triggered by drops in cortisol or low cortisol levels. And so having a proper assessment of cortisol is extremely important for that overall picture. And the way to do that, there's two ways. My preferred way is either doing a saliva testing of cortisol, which you can do through certain labs, certain specialty labs, or urine testing of cortisol, which can be done through those specialty labs, or you can also just do a 24-hour urine cortisol collection. And that can be ordered, through any of your normal labs that you would go to have a blood draw done. And so your doctor can order a 24-hour cortisol urine test to look at what the overall 24-hour period is looking like. So that's catching all the peaks and all the troughs. And so when we're looking at that, we want a healthy cortisol level to be somewhere in the middle of the range. If it is in the lower end of that range, that's going to be a contributing factor to the migraine. So you might still be within normal range, but it's interesting. I'll just kind of sidetrack for a minute. When we're looking at labs, we know from like a lot of research that we have over what labs what a normal lab should look like for someone with migraines. So we know, for example, I'll take thyroid because that's been well studied. Thyroid levels, you can be in the normal range of thyroid labs and still have it be a contributing factor, because somebody with chronic migraines needs to have a different normal range than somebody without, because being on the lower end of what they consider as a normal range of thyroid is actually shown to contribute to intensity and frequency of migraines. So unless a doctor is looking at those labs through the lens of somebody with a migraine and using what we know from research that they need to be above this level, which is, I mean, it's quite a bit different than what the traditional normal level is. Unless they're looking at that, then they're told, well, your labs are fine, it's not your thyroid. When in reality, it might very well be a part of the thyroid because they're not looking at it from a migraine standpoint. So that's just a little sidetrack. So when we're looking at the 24-hour urinary cortisol level, we want to make sure that it's in that upper, the middle, like that 50% range. If it's down below that 50% range, it needs to be looked at closer and from a functional standpoint. And that's where the saliva testing comes in to see when is it spiking, when is it dropping, and correlating that with what time of day the migraines start, because a lot of times we'll see the migraine is starting when the cortisol is dropping for the day, and then it continues. So then we know, all right, that drop in cortisol is a big problem for you. And then we can do something about that and adjust that.
Okay, so similar to the progesterone question, my next one is, are there cortisol hacks that people like if they know this from working with you or someone like you, or they're just listening and they're like, I think this might be it. Like, are there ways to start to get on track with that too?
Yeah. So adrenal stuff, it can't, depending on where you're at, there's kind of multiple levels of that adrenal fatigue, or what we call it is HPA axis dysfunction, right? Where the brain and the adrenals kind of talk to each other. And you can have, so there's normal, and then there's phase 1, 2, and 3. If you're in phase 3, which is what a lot of people call as flat out adrenal fatigue, that takes years, even with like our top intervention, right? That can take years to come back from. But we used to think it wasn't even possible. Now we know it is, it just takes a really long time to do. But, in phase 1 and phase 2, again, a lot of the foundational things are going to be helpful. So that's sleep, that's where sleep cycle, the sleep hygiene. And what I mean by that is like getting to bed at the same time, having a routine before sleep, making sure you're getting good quality sleep, waking up at the same time every morning. Those are really important factors for somebody whose cortisol is kind of all wonky, because, that way the body is like, okay, I know it's 7 o'clock, like it's time to get up, and this is what time I'm getting up. So here's your cortisol for the day. So those things are really important. There are herbs that help. There's a ton of adrenal herbs. And I'm sure if anybody's ever looked for an adrenal supportive supplement, there's like a billion of them. So like, which one do I choose? So there's a lot of those herbs that are out there that are available. And different herbs, some of them are stimulating, some of them are calming, some of them do both stimulating or calming, depending on what the body needs. So, that can be kind of, it's not a one size fit all for that as well. And then again, moving upwards in that intervention, there's also a medication that's called Cortef or hydrocortisone, which is actually a low dose of cortisone, or, what would mimic cortisol in our body. And so sometimes that is needed at a low dose to prevent, we don't want to prevent adrenal suppression, or we want to prevent adrenal suppression. And what that means is if you take a medication that has cortisol, and then your body can just, your adrenals just stop producing cortisol on its own. So we don't want that. That's too much. But if we do a low dose for a long period of time, that actually can help. It can actually, I've seen it like stop a migraine like that and not come back. Like I've had several clients where that was their number one issue. As soon as we figured that out and we got them on that Cortef, like they haven't had a migraine since then. And then of course there's other stuff that they need to be doing as well regularly to continue that healing process. But and again, that's not a high percentage of people, but it can have that kind of an impact. So it's a piece of the puzzle that needs to be looked at.
Absolutely. And in that same brain of like the piece of the puzzle, I've been thinking, like, are migraines a symptom of bigger conditions usually, or is having migraines the condition typically? And does working with you through your program simultaneously address migraines and other conditions that can be coinciding with them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it can be standalone. It can be a single diagnosis. Usually the women that I see, so for myself, I have Hashimoto's, I have fibromyalgia and migraine, and they're all very well controlled now. But they weren't back then. So, and those, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism, like all of those I see those very, very frequently in people with migraines. So it's very common to have multiple things going on, POTS, all kinds of different stuff that can come along with it. But yes, as we're working on those foundational pieces and we're supporting the body's balance, we started seeing all of those symptoms improving. So the fibromyalgia pain starts to drop, and, the gut issues start to go away, and the overactive immune system, or the MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, another very common co-diagnosis with migraines. We start to see all of those things start to calm down as we're working on all of those underlying factors. Because, essentially, if the body isn't working well, then that's when we start getting all these other symptoms, right? So as it comes back online, everything starts to improve. Our main focus is the migraine, but then all of the other symptoms improve as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now I'm going to ask about a different category of it. So I know with the accidents, like if there's certain physical force or trauma like that, is there some sort of neurological or structural thing wrong with your body? I've heard in the past, chiropractors can adjust your brain, not your brain, your skull. But I'm curious if there is that piece that also plays a role.
Yeah, there definitely is. So in our approach, we have 8 major areas that we focus, that science has shown has some level of correlation with migraines, right? And so that's diet/gut health, hormones, adrenals and stress, neurotransmitters, genetics, structural, and then mental, emotional, and spiritual, right? So mental, emotional, spiritual, and detox. So those are the 8 areas, those foundational areas that we're working on. So structural is in there. It's one of the 8, because there is a very high correlation of involvement in the upper cervical, neck specifically, but it can be all along the spine that can contribute. But specifically C1 and C2, the first 2 vertebrae from our skull attaching to our neck. And there's a very high correlation of issues with C1, C2 being out, and chronic headaches in general, migraines included in that category. So that's a very important piece, is, looking at the structure, looking at how somebody is carrying themselves, ergonomics when they're at work, movement and, stretching, physical therapy, all of that is going to be important part of keeping our bodies working well. One of the things that I think is very fascinating, and I'd love to just kind of throw it in here because it kind of goes along with the structural piece, is eye misalignment. So this is actually something that's fairly new over the last few years. They can test for eye misalignment, and what that basically is. And if somebody is majorly triggered by, Melissa, this kind of came to mind when you shared about being triggered by all the computer work, is what happens in some cases is our eyes focus beyond the computer, right? So when we're supposed to be focusing at something close to us, it can be our natural tendency can be to actually focus behind it. And in order to bring it in focus, we have to use the muscles and really strain to get the words to not be blurry. And we don't even know we're doing it because that's what our brain is responsible for. But ultimately that strain on our eyes contributes to it triggers the trigeminal nerve, which is the main nerve in our head that kind of is implicated in migraines. And so that can trigger that pain, and a migraine can develop. So they actually have the ability to test for this misalignment now. Not every eye doctor does, but if they are curious about this, neurolens.com, neuro as in brain, and lens.com. And there's a quiz that they can take. And if they it'll tell them, yes, you likely have an issue, you should be checked, or no, it doesn't sound like this is a problem for you. And then they can say, check for local providers in your area that can check for this. And then it will list, based on their location, who they can schedule with to actually have this tested. And then there's specific eyeglasses that can correct this. And it can make a huge difference. One of my clients they dropped their migraines by like 70% within 2 weeks of starting with these glasses. So it can have a major impact, but nobody really talks about it or knows about it because it's still fairly new technology. I think this is only like the 3rd year that this testing ability has been out. So I would really encourage everybody who has chronic migraines or chronic headaches, especially if they're worse by computer work, to go get that checked, because that can be a big game changer. Anyway, I think I kind of like dove away from your original question, but
no, I'm actually so happy you said that. I wrote that down because I'm wearing contacts right now and I have glasses, but my eyesight's gotten a little worse over the years. And I've actually just started hearing about was it behavioral optometry and all these different new types of glasses. And I went to the eye doctor last year and it's gotten a little better, but I'm like, there's something wrong with my eyes. I'm getting the worst headaches. I would say they're like the back of my head, the back of my eyes, not like a migraine, but it's like from the screens. And he's like, everything looks fine to me. Just spend a little less time on the computer. I wish I could, but I wish I could.
I know.
But it makes a lot of sense, from the focus piece that you're saying, and the misalignment, because I've had slight astigmatism in the past and all this other stuff. So I feel like they might not just contribute to the migraines, but to a few other things that I deal with.
Yeah,
so
for sure. And that also too, we'll adjust our head posture to try to get the best way to focus it, which then again is going to have tension on the back and the neck too, right? So our posture is affected by our vision too. So anyway, all ties in together, right? But you'll have to let me know if you do the testing and if it comes back and you try the glasses. I'm curious about people that are getting them, since it's starting to become more of a known thing.
Oh, I will definitely keep you updated.
Cool.
That is so cool. Melissa and I were literally talking about this today or yesterday about the behavioral eye or the eye therapy, and how when you were saying you're looking at a screen, but you're looking beyond, there's people that say that also portrays how you function in your life. You can't be focused in the present. You're always thinking about the future and how that impacts you mentally and emotionally. It's just crazy how so many things are actually together. And one of the reasons why we were so excited to talk to you is because you have a naturopathic medical degree and combine all the things of, understanding science and medicine and the research, but also looking at all these other things that could be seemingly unrelated, or the other tests to show you. And I just love how many times you've said, well, there's herbs for that. I'm like, yes, we need this.
That's right. There is so much medicine available to us that with herb. I love my herbs. I am such an herbal freak. It's amazing learning all of the different plants that we have. And most of our medicine is based off of 1 or 2 active components in the plants, right? So if you think about all the medications we have, there's probably a plant that, inspired that medication. So anyway, I'm kind of an herbal nerd.
Okay. I aspire to be an herbal nerd. I'm just dipping my toes, but I think it's just so fascinating.
Yeah. It's great, the tools that we have available to us. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I was going to ask, because we've talked about, the hormonal piece for migraines, the male, how that migraines impact them. But one, I think, piece of the demographic that gets chronic migraines a lot that we haven't touched on is women that are in menopause or going through menopause or just went through menopause. And was just curious if you could kind of talk more into perhaps a woman who's never had headaches and migraines in their life, but started after or during menopause, and why that happens.
I hear all the time, their doctor's like, well, just you're in perimenopause, just wait 10 years and then they'll probably get better. It's like, what? That's not, no. And the statistic is, 30%, 33, it's a third of women have no change after menopause. A third of women get better after menopause, and a third of women get worse after menopause, right? So that's like a 1 in 3 chance that you're going to improve, and a 2 in 3 chance that there's no change or you're going to get worse. And so this kind of comes back to the hormonal discussion that we had earlier, is when so this ties in the cortisol adrenal piece and the hormone piece. So when our ovaries stop working, our adrenals are what take over the hormone production postmenopausally. And so if we've already depleted our adrenals' ability to function well because of just life and stress and, for the last 40, 50 years of life, then if it's not doing a good job with the cortisol, it's probably not going to be doing a good job with our hormones postmenopausally, right? And so those are the people that we tend to see. They're kind of flatlined cortisol, they're almost non-existent estrogen, progesterone, and nobody feels good when you're at those low levels, right? So if you start noticing, well, things started getting worse around perimenopause, and then menopause hit, and it was just it's just been downhill since then bioidentical hormones, like go explore the bioidentical hormone piece, because as soon as you bring things up, it's not going to be to the same level you would have had before you were in menopause, but just a low, steady level of estrogen, progesterone can make a huge difference in women with postmenopausal migraines.
I think that'll be so helpful for so many of our listeners, even if it might not impact them now.
Yeah, it really is helpful to know all of this information, because I never knew a lot of this about migraines. And I want to go back to something you said earlier, because I know you mentioned histamines, and then you mentioned MCAS, which is like what, mast cell cells
activation syndrome. Yep.
And those are caused by a buildup of histamines, right?
Correct.
How does that play a role in migraines, and do people with like worse allergies have worse migraines, and is part of the treatment with treating like the allergy piece as well as the hormonal piece?
Yes. So histamine is a kind of a well-known migraine trigger. So MCAS or mast cell activation syndrome is basically where the immune system is putting out inappropriate levels of histamine to different things. So just because you have allergies doesn't mean you have MCAS, but MCAS can cause allergies. So a lot of times, MCAS or excess histamine can be secondary to an undiagnosed parasitic or bacterial infection or viral infection that's just never been really caught or addressed. Sometimes, it's the immune system going haywire for whatever reason. It can be gut related. There's a lot of reasons that it can happen, and we don't really know exactly everything that contributes to it yet, right? So, but the thing is, there is a high correlation between people with chronic migraines and an ultimate diagnosis of MCAS. Like there's a pretty big link there. So, So to circle back to your question, when one of the things, like the red flags I look for a histamine problem is leftover foods trigger me. I can't take probiotics because it seems like that makes my migraines worse. I have seasonal allergies or symptoms of seasonal allergies, even if it's year round, right? Like the sneezing, itchy eyes, runny nose, all of those kinds of things. If you break out in hives randomly for no apparent reason, all of those things are histamine related and can indicate that there's an issue there. But I also look at what's medications do you take as part of your migraine cocktail? Do you take Benadryl, and does that help your migraine? Like if you go take a dose of Benadryl and go pass out on the bed and go sleep for 8 hours and that takes care of it, that tells me that there's a histamine piece. If all you need is Benadryl, that's an antihistamine, right? If that's taking care of it, then we need to really look at what's going on with that histamine piece, because that's going to be a major player for this person's particular migraine. So we can utilize our understanding of how the medications work to kind of backtrack to say, okay, well, then this is a major issue for you. And there's different things that we can do. So one of the important things for people with histamine issues is there's certain B vitamins that they should not be using. There's B12 and folate. One of the more common B vitamin options now that's coming forward is methyl B12 or methylcobalamin, methylfolate, MTH folate, any of those that have methyl in the front of it. When you add methyl to histamine, it creates a Superman histamine, right? So if they're taking their daily B vitamin And they might not have any idea that this is contributing, but it can actually be making their histamine issue worse. So understanding that this is a problem is important, because then there are certain supplements that you need to stay away from, because this is contributing, even though it's a healthy thing and most people want to be on B vitamins, you should not be on these types of B vitamins, right? So it's really important to kind of understand that, because then there's certain dietary things that we need to work on, and there's certain probiotics that you should not be taking because they're prohistamine. And all of those can, once we kind of dial in that piece, then we can work on helping to improve how your body is processing histamine. And again, that comes back to some genetics, that comes back to some lifestyle things, and we can manage that lesser ability of your body to address the histamine, and we can improve how that works while also being cognizant of how much histamine you're being exposed to. And so that's one of the things that I love to teach my clients who have histamine issues is, all right, you have really bad spring allergies, so you have to go low histamine. You have to avoid this, that, and the other thing. You need to start working on histamine support in February through June. And then they know they need to be really good around, self-care and dietary things just for that short period of time. And then the rest of the year, they might be okay to do whatever, and they know what they need to do, to keep themselves feeling good the rest of the time. So again, you can just really up the ante when it comes to problem like flare time based on what they've figured out is problematic for them. And histamine is one of those that kind of usually is cyclical every year. So.
Wow. I'm basically allergic to life at this point.
Yeah.
And I've been going to see an applied kinesiologist and do some muscle testing to figure out what more triggers are. Like I've been put on herbs in the past, and I have both fall and spring allergies. So I know like even just certain fruits I'm not allergic to, but during those times, if I eat it, it makes things worse. But something you mentioned about the B12 vitamins and is very interesting, because I recently was told to give up caffeine because they have paraxanthines, and specifically like methylxanthines that I don't react well to. So I'm curious if that methyl piece has some correlation in the B vitamins. So I'm definitely going to be looking into what else has that. And I'm like, my mind is blown right now. This is so interesting. And the other piece is I started to get with my allergies. I never got sinus issues until the past 2 years. And with the sinus pressure, that's where I start getting migraines. And because I feel like it's just pressure in my head. So it makes sense how it's all very correlated.
Yeah. So for you, since you do think, okay, this might be a piece for me, adenosylcobalamin or adenylyl B12 or hydroxycobalamin are the two forms that would be okay for you. You do not want cyanocobalamin and you do not want methylcobalamin.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We love the pro tips.
Yes. Great.
And would love to, for our listeners who maybe don't suffer from headaches or migraines right now, but know somebody who does, or just want to prevent them, what are a couple things that our listeners can do, even if they do have them or they don't, to kind of start laying that foundation, just so that they either can, start to make them a little bit better or prevent them altogether?
Well, one of the first things that I have all of my clients do, and I think that the earlier you can start this, the better. It's not really a preventative thing, but if you're struggling with migraines or they're starting, it's easy to just be like, well, oh crap, today's a migraine day. Okay, well, it happens like once a month, whatever. But if you can start tracking, tracking is the most valuable information that somebody who understands like all the things behind migraines, having a long list of that and starting to piece out those patterns is, that's the number one above anything else. So tracking your migraines and correlating them with the time of day that they start. Your period, where you are in your cycle, foods that you're eating, or, is it a blood sugar thing? So you haven't eaten, sleep, how much sleep you got, what your stress is looking like, how much hydration you are. And one of the things that most people don't think about is blood pressure. So blood pressure, you should know what your blood pressure normally is, and then you should know what it is when you have a migraine, because a lot of times there's a correlation between drops in blood pressure, when we have a migraine. And when we're in pain, we should have blood pressure spikes. When we drop, when we're in pain from a migraine, then that tells us, okay, there's a low blood pressure component and we need to address that. So, so those things are all supremely important. As far as, just general health tips, again, going back to those foundations, like I sound like a broken record, but I can't tell you how much improvement I see in my clients in the first, just before we even get into specifics for them, when we focus on that sleep cycle, that sleep schedule, when we focus on proper hydration, including using electrolytes. A lot of people will just drink like a gallon of water, but they don't understand, like when we drink too much water, that's just as problematic as if not drinking enough, because then that starts to dilute our electrolytes, our sodium, potassium, calcium, and all. When we have that, then our cells can't take the water in. So then we're drinking the water and we're peeing it right out and we're still dehydrated, right? And so, and then that also interferes with the communication and the ability to bring things in, nutrients into the cell. So electrolytes are extremely important. In the hydration status. And then, making sure that stress management, like people talk about this all the time. And it was to a point where even as the doctor, I'm like, yeah, stress management. Okay, whatever. But I mean, it's really, it and diet are probably the two things that if you focus on those two things alone, you can make 90% of the improvement right there. Because those two, what you eat and the inflammation it causes, kind of our gut health, all of that combined, in combination with the stress and how cortisol impacts our sleep and our immune system and histamine release and our hormones and all of that, those two alone are probably the two biggest game changers. So, and I'm not just talking about, well, I do yoga twice a week and that's fantastic, but it has to be like literally hour to hour, right? This should be something that is so incorporated in our day that the second we feel an increase in stress, we should recognize it in our body. And I'm still not there. Like it's hard to do, especially, if you're a type A person, you're like, well, I got stuff to do. I can't focus on if I'm stressed or not. But there was an interesting study, I love this study, that they took two groups of people and they put them in a functional MRI machine so that they could look at what their brain was doing. And they put them under stress by showing them super horrific pictures. And then they saw what their brain was doing. And in one group, they just did that and they sent them away. And then the other group, they did that. And then they said, okay, now just focus on how you're manifesting that stress. Like how do you feel? How's your body feel? So just becoming aware of how their body was responding to that stress without doing anything else, it actually shut off that stress response. So simply the act of being aware of the stress through your day makes actually a huge impact in the amount of stress your body is feeling. So even if you don't have time to go meditate or take do some yoga or whatever, just being aware of it is enough to help modify the stress response that you're having. So those are probably my two biggest things, really focusing on a healthy anti-inflammatory whole foods diet. And if you don't know what that means, just look up like the Whole30. It's a pretty good place to start. And then that stress, like being aware of that stress as you're moving throughout the day.
Yeah, those are two big important things. It's funny you said Whole30 because that like kickstarted everything for me. I've done it like multiple times and it's been the best teacher also to like learn what foods work and what don't and like good recipes afterwards.
It's a great starting point.
I find the awareness piece very interesting too, where you can recognize the stress and how it's manifesting in your body. And I almost feel like it's, instead of deflecting, okay, I'm stressed, but I'm going to the next meeting or I'm going to do the next thing. It's like giving you a minute to like just sink in and think about it. And I feel like that probably a few minutes also allows your body to kind of move through the emotions.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that's one thing that I noticed when I started implementing this is like, if I was holding my breath or if I was breathing really shallowly and quickly or whatever it was, when I recognized it was happening, you can't help but want to like take that deep breath and just kind of resettle. And it might literally be a 5-second thing, but then afterwards, like you move into this new place. And of course, it ramps up again. So you have to keep doing that. But you can't help but recognize those stress and then try to do something to make your body more comfortable, right? Even if it's just, a quick stretch of the neck or whatever it is. So yeah.
Yeah, everyone always says that. They're like, sorry, I just sighed. I just had to take a deep breath. I'm like, actually, so I used to teach yoga, and sighing is actually good because taking a deep breath and like open mouth exhales release heat in your body. So it allows you to like release heat and kind of relax a little bit. So it makes sense.
Totally. Yep.
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, you just gave us, I feel like, so many good pieces of advice for somebody dealing with a migraine, but generally we're asking our closing questions. What is one piece of advice you'd give to someone starting their health journey today?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is finding a doctor or a team that you like, that you trust, and that actually listens to you. I think that especially in how current medicine is practiced, and I don't want to sound negative to any particular doctors or groups, but I mean, a lot of times you get 5 minutes with your doctor and you don't feel heard, or you feel dismissed, or, it can be very frustrating. And then that just sets up a whole negative, like there's not a good therapeutic relationship. And that is extremely important. So I am a big advocate, like your doctor is working for you, right? You hired them. You're ultimately the boss of your body, and you know what your body needs and what's going on with it. So your doctor should be listening to your input. You might not know what it means medically, but you certainly know what it means to live in your body. So I think that's my number one piece is just, if you go and you're like, yeah, it's fine, whatever, but you don't really have that good vibe, go see a few other doctors. Just, go in and talk to them. You should find somebody that you really actually enjoy going to see, as opposed to dreading it, because that you're going to actually find a big difference in your response to treatments when you have somebody that's working with you. And just having that mental and emotional support is huge when it comes to healing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So what do you think the future of health looks like?
Yeah, this was a really interesting question. As I thought about it, I kind of think that the future of health looks like prevention. I'm seeing a lot of people shifting away from the reactive medicine, like I have high blood pressure and I go in for medication, and more towards my dad has high blood pressure. I'm concerned that my blood pressure might get high. What can I do to prevent that? And I think that's amazing, because if we can work towards preventing these things in the first place, like everybody's health is going to be better. So I think that people are really getting wise to the fact that medications will help in certain situations and are absolutely necessary tools, but that they're not really the answer for good health. And I'm excited to see. When I first started naturopathic medicine 10 years ago, people were like, what are you now? And now it's like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I want to come see, like just the shift in mentality I've seen over the last 10 years has been really eye-opening. So I think that a lot of people are getting on board with that. It's cool.
Totally. And I think that aligns with the new definition of like what health looks like. It's not the absence of disease, but it's like truly feeling good and feeling your best. And so when you were saying that, I was like, oh yeah, I hope that's the future of health.
I certainly do too. Yeah, I do too.
And our last question is, since this is connecting the dots, can you tell our listeners how they can connect with you? If they are struggling from migraines, how they can take your course, and where they can find you on social media?
Absolutely. So my website is migrainemastery.org. So that's a great place to get started. On Facebook, I've got just my regular business page called Migraine Mastery. And then I also have a more secure group specifically for people with migraines called Migraine Mastery and My Migraine Support. So anybody can join that. And then on YouTube, I have a channel called Migraine Mastery, A Migraine-Free Life, where I kind of go a little bit more into depth into all of these various different topics. So depending on what is of interest and pertinent to a particular individual. So
that is so cool.
Yeah,
Yay.
definitely will be looking up some of those videos after today's conversation.
Good.
Same. Well, thank you so much for spending this hour with us. It flew by. I cannot believe it's been an hour. But I know that our listeners are going to get so much valuable information. And I know Melissa and I took plenty of notes for our own personal.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, good. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Connecting the Dots. If there was something that resonated with you, or you simply enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend, leave a 5-star rating and written review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you can be the first to know when a new episode is released. And if you'd like to further support us, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow the show on Instagram at connectingthedots.podcast on both platforms. We're also on TikTok at Connecting the Dots Podcast.
We have intentionally curated resource guides that go with every episode to give you the tools, resources, and information you need to make tangible changes at home. You can purchase these guides at kathleencarney.com/resources. If you would like to work with me directly, you can also go to kathleencarney.com/services and book a free discovery call to decide which service is right for you. Make sure you follow me at Kathleen Carney Wellness on Instagram and TikTok.
And I'm Melissa Chamis on Instagram and The Lazy Yogi separated by underscores on TikTok. And we'll link all this information in the show notes to make it easier for you.
We appreciate your continued support and look forward to hanging with you next week.